Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm a social studies educator, historian, and host of this, the Everything is a Primary Source podcast. I'm also an avid collector of popular culture artifacts. I love what I find at thrift store outlets, garage sale leftovers, and what I spot just making my way around the built world. I enjoy sorting through boxes of free books and magazines, not to mention online collections like Internet Archive, and of course the Library of Congress. But you don't need to spend your time digging through bins or following online rabbit holes to get a look into the past. The movies and TV we watch, the books we read, and the games we play are all documents of the past. So is fashion, food, music, toys, even the roads we travel on and the places we live and work in. Everything is a primary source. This podcast is the result of exhibiting these kinds of artifacts in public, getting passersby to select an item they connect with, and then chatting with me to see what it says about the time, place, and people who made it. The conversation you are about to hear, therefore, is your history, my history, our history, through popular culture. Popular culture absolutely connects us, and this is proof positive. I have two people that did not know each other until about 5 minutes ago. And because we were talking about a topic they both care about, we decided to do this all together. So I have Danielle and Eleanor. And Danielle, you're from?
Cincinnati, Ohio.
All right. And
Nashville, Tennessee.
Nashville, Tennessee, and you're working in Pennsylvania now, right?
I currently live in Pennsylvania, but I'm a Lewis F. McNeil Fellow at the Winter Program for American Material Culture.
Well, I'm just so glad to, and I'm just lowly Eric, who's from Dover, New Hampshire. But we were talking before we hit record, and we're going to talk about it some more right now, about it's a very historiography type idea, like commemoration. How does a single historic event appear when being memorialized later on? And what started that was you picked up a bunch of postcards from the Civil War Wax Museum in Gettysburg. And I went to Gettysburg a couple years ago for the first time in a while, and I was kind of bummed because it seemed like the appeal of the place had worn off, that there wasn't nearly as many people, and then the ones that I interacted with, like we took a bus tour at one point. It was spooky because it's around Halloween time. We took a ghost tour.
Very haunted.
A lot of people didn't know half the questions that the guy was asking about.
Yeah.
They didn't know the main figures of the conflict.
Yeah.
They didn't know much about the battle itself, and I feel like that has kind of diminished.
I think there was when the movie came out, the Gettysburg movie, and it was based on the Fallen Angels, I believe it's the name of the kind of the novelization of the battle. I think
the Killer Angels. That's
Killer Angels. Sorry, that's it. There was such a entering into the popular consciousness that really sparked, I think, a lot of Gettysburg lore of Joshua Chamberlain and some of these big figures played on the silver screen. But we haven't had kind of the movie of our generation. And I think Civil War has also become so amorphous in the American mind.
It's interesting because that came on the heels of the Ken Burns documentary series.
Yes, that too.
And the Wax Museum and just those postcards and Civil War everything in Gettysburg, it made sense in the 1960s because it was the centennial. Mm-hmm. And then you get to 1989, 1990 when there's no even number reason as to why Ken Burns puts that out. Yeah. And I wonder if it's just a matter of keeping the message alive.
Yeah.
And the documentary is a form of commemoration. It's documenting. And the message throughout that one is this is a terrible thing that happened. We never want it to happen again. Right? Eleanor, what's your perspective and what's your connection? Because you don't live terribly, or you don't work terribly far from Gettysburg, and you're also pretty close to the birthplace of the country in Philadelphia.
Yes, yeah.
A lot of commemorating going on there. Have you witnessed similar kinds of changes over time as how things are memorialized?
The thing that was first jumping out to me was that I feel that when we talk about the Civil War, it doesn't have the same kind of triumphant feeling that the Revolution does sometimes when it's being commemorated. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if it's that no conflict has easy answers or easy ways to navigate around the horrors of it. But I wonder if it's easier to think about the revolution in that way because it's tied to the founding, whereas this conflict, the Civil War, was tied to bringing back the country in a new way, and so that's a little bit more complex. It's not as easy.
And there's a really central, like, moral issue at stake. Like, this was a war about slavery and the expansion of slavery, and you can't get away with that. Like, one side was fighting for the right to own people, and that's a very difficult thing to confront. And it confronts things that I think we're still dealing with as a nation in terms of racism, classism, economies, and how they function and how they have been set up to function. It's hard to confront sometimes, and people want, and it's not that far away. I don't know, as a historian, that seems kind of crazy to say. I mean, I know it was 175 years ago, but at the same time, these are still like great-great-grandparents to some people.
Well, and it's so closely tied to region because coming from Tennessee, from the South, the Civil War is more in our minds and in our history, in our museums, than the Revolution. Because I mean, there were people living there, indigenous people, enslaved people, early settlers, but it's just not present in the same way that it is on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Well, we're at an ephemera fair.
Yeah.
And so we have visual reminders of a lot of these things. It wasn't really part of the culture of the Revolutionary era to commemorate the same way that 100 years later did.
Yeah.
Nor did they have as many possibilities.
Exactly.
Right? You think about the photography that was such a part of the Civil War.
Yes.
Not even a possibility, 7 years earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something else right there. Is in the Gettysburg Address. Lincoln is directly relating it back to, he didn't have an even number like 200 or 250. He was just like 7. But, he's marking that as the important date. Where with the Civil War, do you have an important date? Is it November of 1863 with the Gettysburg Address? Or is it just, when do you put it? So there's so many things to, it's like a Venn diagram. Like they share in some things, not in others. So the Revolutionary era could not be commemorated the same way.
Yeah.
There is a lot of commemoration during and even just before the war. So like the official seal of the Confederate States of America features George Washington on horseback.
And patriotic covers do as well. Both the Union and the Confederacy claimed him on there.
Yeah.
Right. And you talked about Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, the story at Round Top, Little Round Top, is that the ghost of George Washington appeared and rallied the troops to save the country.
The spirit of freedom.
And up in where I live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, when the GAR opened their very first post after the war, they named it now it's the Storer Post. The last name is Storer, Storer. But the guy that they named it for was a rear admiral in the Navy. His name was George Washington Storer.
Oh, yeah.
And he was one of the few people that as a baby was personally blessed by George Washington himself.
Interesting.
So George Washington was in Portsmouth visiting, and he was his baby that was named after him. And he said something to the effect of, like, I hope you do better with my name than I ever did. So commemorating Washington through name.
I mean, I will say that, like, I look at soldier records all the time. I'm constantly looking at soldiers. And the two most common initials you see, because especially the Southerners would more often have just initials instead of their full names, it's GW and BF, Benjamin Franklin.
Really?
You see a million Benjamin Franklin so-and-sos and George Washington so-and-sos. So a few other ones, but those are the main
Also
ones.
think about place names. I'm assuming Franklin, Tennessee. Is there a good chance that that's Benjamin Franklin that was named for?
I hadn't looked into it, but it could be.
Yeah, I mean, it would stand to reason, but I get surprised before,
Much of Ohio, the counties and townships in Ohio's, you can trace basically all the revolutionary names. You have everything from Jefferson and Hamilton and Stark County.
We have Lafayette and
it's like, and everywhere he went, I mean, they were commemorating. We're right now in the 200th of his grand tour.
Yeah.
And then you think of so you have
we can transition to this.
right.
Then with the Civil War, I think another major difference would be I lost it. All right, well, I'll delete that part. So when it comes to other versions of commemoration, in your two lines of work and your studies, what one thing do you like to bring up the most? Is there some primary source that you point to and say, this is a great example of what I'm talking about right now?
I think for me, I really gravitate towards images and photographs of people celebrating these. So if you're seeing like county fairs or community get-togethers, because it's so easy to look at these as these big national commemorations that we're assuming everyone has kind of the same approach to or meaning that they're taking from those. But everyone is an individual, and they're going to come away with different significances for any commemorative event.
Speaking on that, one time I was driving across Ohio to go to Pittsburgh for a wedding, and on the way back, my husband and I stopped at the 178th commemoration bean festival in Ironton, Ohio. Turns out it has started as a GAR event, and it is still continuing. I checked this year. It's still happening, but it was a lovely thing. They had a cauldron that had looked and said what it was from 1865, that they made a giant bean stew in, and they had a band playing, and they crowned a bean queen and a bean king. But it was a veteran organization that was like a very local, hyper-local union thing that still exists in the year 2025.
I love it.
It's really cool.
We start with a very obvious commemorative thing, like a wax museum, which those things are always creepy anyway. And then move to these more subtle, but equally as powerful. And it underscores something I've been talking about with people all day. If we take the time, and it doesn't take much time, but if you take the time to find out why are they doing this, what is the significance of it, you learn that we are far more connected with the past than we realize. So I thank you so much for joining me on this conversation.
Thank
Are you going to stick around a little bit longer?
Yeah, I can stick around because I have more thoughts.
Popular culture, by definition, connects and unites us, and proves that people of different backgrounds, in fact, have a lot in common with one another. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, at least in part, for that reason. If it connects with you and you'd like to add to it, or any of the podcast episodes, just visit everything-history.com and search for the Everything is a Primary Source project, which can be found in the classroom section of the website. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Be sure to rate and share this podcast wherever you are listening to it now, and follow Everything as a Primary Source on social media, including YouTube and especially Instagram. Thank you for listening to the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source.